Welcome to the Moved to Meditate podcast. I'm your host, Addie D. Hilster. If you're a yoga practitioner or teacher who knows that there's more to yoga than poses, but you're wondering where to find that, come join our quiet little party. Here you'll find resources to help you deepen your practice, as well as insightful conversations with yoga, movement, and meditation teachers from a range of traditions. On this podcast, we spotlight the more contemplative aspects of movement practice. So we talk about all things gentle yoga, meditation, yin, restorative, yoga therapy, mindfulness, and more. Listen in and connect to a community of like-minded practitioners. Hello. It's great to be with you here on the podcast today. This is Addie. I hope you've been doing well. The sun is out right now here in Washington State, and of course my office is right above the apartment complex's playground. So there's a chance you might hear some random voices coming through in the podcast, and it's probably just the kids outside and, all of us just enjoying these first few hints of spring weather, which is really nice. Our topic today is compassion, and it's something that's been very much on my mind these days because things have been a little unusual around here, mainly because for the last 2 weeks, either my mom or Mike's dad has been in the hospital, which has been really hard. One of them went into the hospital right about the time the other one got to go home, so it's been like 2.5 solid weeks for us of having one parent in the hospital. And they both live back east across the country from us, so we've been doing a lot of waiting and watching and kind of being unsure if we can make plans and stick to them. And, of course, that's on top of how hard it is to just watch them struggle with these big health issues. I do have an interview episode in the works for next week, though, if all goes to plan. And I'm hoping to get back to more guest conversations soon. But in the meantime, we've been doing these solo episodes and digging into our deeper dive topics and other topics around meditation practice in particular. And today I'm going to be introducing our deeper dive theme of compassion. This one will build on what we've been exploring all through March with the Metta theme, or the loving kindness practice. So for April, we'll look at how our practices can support the deep carrying of compassion with wisdom and balance. And in this tradition, kindness and compassion are very interrelated, but they are a little bit different as expressions of mindfulness and heartfulness. So we'll get into that in a moment. But as I mentioned, this will be our deeper dive theme for the next month. And the deeper dive gives us like a little through line that gets woven into different Moved to Meditate activities that I offer. So you can kind of choose your own adventure and engage with it in whatever way works for you. I always started off with a podcast talk about the topic like this to introduce it, which I think is good for the auditory learners. And then in the first week of the month, I send out a worksheet that you can download and use in your personal practice, which maybe is for you visual learners and just people who like something tangible to hold in their hand. The worksheet always has lots of creative ways to contemplate the topic, like through definitions and words and images and writing prompts and different suggestions for how to weave it into your yoga practice, your movement practice, and your meditation. And then in the third week of the month, I send out a guided meditation on the topic. So it all kind of comes together. You use the pieces of it that you want to use, and it's all free. So all you need to do to receive these resources each month is just make sure that you're on my email list. You can go to movedtomeditate.yoga to sign up for that, or just look for the link in the podcast description, the show notes that I've got with this episode. So we have been working through the 4 heart qualities over these last few months as our deeper dive themes. These heart qualities are often called the Brahma Viharas in the Buddhist tradition, which means divine abodes. The Brahma Vihara. A vihara is like a home, and Brahma is divine or kind of godly, or think of it as like a good and wholesome home for the mind and a place for the mind and the heart to rest. So in February, we looked at equanimity. In March, we looked at Metta. April will be compassion. And this is kind of a spoiler alert if you know what the fourth Brahma Vihara is. So it means that in May, we'll be looking at mudita, which is joy and gratitude. So these are 4 qualities that are all responses of the mindful, awake heart to different kinds of circumstances. And they also kind of work together to balance each other out. So if you've listened to the episodes on Metta, or you know it from other practice, that's kind of like our baseline of benevolence, this kind of default setting that we're cultivating where we respond in general to things with goodwill and kindness and benevolence. Compassion, or Karuna is the word for it in both Pali and Sanskrit. So compassion, Karuna, is when the benevolent heart comes into contact with suffering. It rises to the occasion, or you can think of it as the heart opens from that baseline benevolence to meet the struggle and to express compassion. Equanimity is the steadiness that helps us navigate all these different ups and downs. And then mudita is the joy and gratitude that reminds us that the goodness is part of the picture too. So we establish a sense of basic friendliness and goodwill, or metta, and this opens into compassion when we encounter suffering or pain, which can be our own pain or suffering or someone else's or that of the world. This is really relevant for mental and emotional distress and pain, and also physical pain. The last podcast episode last week was all about how to work with pain during meditation, how meditation can help, and how it also might need to be adjusted to accommodate the pain experience intelligently. And that intelligence arises from compassion, and self-compassion practices can be really key for transforming one's relationship to pain. So this goes hand in hand with last week's episode as well. Compassion is really simply caring, and it's a way of being with what's challenging, whether we can directly change it or not, and learning to meet our own difficulties with less aversion. Compassion is our ability to recognize suffering without having to turn away and ignore it or push it away aggressively, but also bringing our awareness in so we don't perpetuate it or drown in it. Basically, it just helps us avoid shooting lots and lots of second arrows. Compassion is a key part of mindfulness practice. As we practice and our awareness increases, it's not always easy to be seeing more clearly and to be with our mind and all of its patterns as they are. It's not uncommon when you start meditating to suddenly feel like you're worse than you were before. Has anybody felt this? Because you're really noticing how active your mind is, and you might feel like you have more thoughts than ever before, and you're sensing all the tension in your body more acutely and noticing certain limitations and habits more, and maybe you just seem more sensitive than ever. And you're probably not worse. You're probably just adjusting to a new level of awareness. So a sense of humor really helps, but so does compassion. It's a lot better response than the self-judgment and doubt that often come up in that sort of phase of practice. And there's a classic analogy that's given in the Buddhist tradition, and it's the analogy of a bird. So if you picture a bird with 2 wings, the 2 wings of the bird are wisdom and compassion. It can't fly at all without that wisdom or awareness that we're developing in our meditation, but that's not enough by itself. The compassion wing is also really necessary if the bird is going to take off. We have to have both in balance. And we do have this caring, compassionate capacity naturally. It's not that we have to manufacture it out of thin air. It's not that that's what our practice is doing, but it's sort of removing what gets in our way. Because it's harder to access compassion or metta or any of these states when we are stressed or surprised or upset or angry or tired or hungry or under a lot of pressure or confused or isolated, or name the state, something like that. And of course, many people and many of us are in those kinds of states, chronically, or have spent a lot of time in them and in our life. So we are doing our practices to rediscover what's innately true already, to get back in touch with that natural awareness and empathy and heartfulness. So here's a little story about how natural compassion is, how I learned about this in one way, and how simple it can really be. So I'll take you back in time that Mike and I met when we were in college. And one Christmas, we were staying at his parents' house for the holidays on Christmas break. And I came down with bronchitis. And I was pretty sick. I was 19 years old and staying at my boyfriend's family's house. And this was during a time that there was a lot of conflict with my family, which was part of why we were staying with his parents. So it was not the best holiday time. And I was so sick, all I could do really was sit in the living room and watch all the college football bowl games that were on and try not to cough. And this was before Netflix, so it was not the best. And yes, Mike and his parents showed me a lot of compassion, if that's where you're thinking the story is going. They took good care of me with the bronchitis, but the part that I really remember, the kind of compassion teaching that I take from this, was from their little dachshund, Scarlet, this little dog. Now, Scarlet was quite an energetic little dog, and she tended to spend her days like darting around the living room, barking at squirrels through the window, and coming over and plopping a soggy tennis ball at your feet to play fetch with down the hallway and run up and down. But when I was sick, she actually didn't do all of that. She would just come up and hop up in my lap and sit in the chair with me really quietly for hours and hours. And it was amazing. It was kind of like she sensed my low energy and knew intuitively how to comfort me. And she could have just ignored me and played with somebody else, but she chose to sit with me. And to me, that is such a natural expression of compassion, that another being could recognize that something was off and to adjust to someone, to accompany them, and to respond in the appropriate way to ease their struggle. That's compassion. So we can think of lots of examples of how to practice compassion in action and compassion for others. Like it could be bringing food over to a friend's house when someone is sick. Or when my mom was in the hospital recently, a friend came in and did her nails. And that was really sweet, very compassionate. It could be volunteering or donating to support a cause that you care about or a relief effort in the world. It could be just taking the time to listen to somebody. It could be speaking up to protect someone from harm that's being done. It could be holding someone in your meditation. So it depends on the situation. It depends on your resources, your capacities, where you are, who you are, what's available, what's appropriate. And we can think of many examples of how to apply compassion for ourselves. This is really important practice, and it could look like just pausing for a breath to notice how you feel after reading a news headline, much less the whole article. It could be putting your hand over your heart in a soothing way when you're stuck at a traffic light and you're feeling time pressure. It could be putting your phone in airplane mode for a few hours. Just that, taking a break. Or it could be setting some other kind of boundary with someone. Maybe it could be doing a restorative yoga or yin yoga practice on a tired day. There's really infinite expressions of how you could meet yourself with compassion, depending on what's needed. And growing our capacity for compassion also keeps us from going into spiritual bypass mode, which is when we kind of want to avoid anything negative and can't bear to admit when things are negative and that problems still arise, and that even though we have this great practice, it doesn't magically remove us from the reality of an imperfect world. It's kind of the good vibes only on steroids. And many practitioners go through a phase where they compartmentalize like that, and everything's all love and light over here, as long as I can just stay away from anything yucky. But compassion practice actually prepares us to engage with all of reality. And this is a quote from the beloved Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron. It's kind of along these lines. She said, "Spiritual awakening is frequently described as a journey to the top of a mountain. We leave our attachments and our worldliness behind and slowly make our way to the top. At the peak, we have transcended all pain. The only problem with this metaphor is that we leave all the others behind. In the process of discovering our true nature, the journey goes down, not up. Instead of transcending the suffering of all creatures, we move towards turbulence and doubt. We explore the reality and unpredictability of insecurity and pain, and we try not to push it away. At our own pace, without speed or aggression, we move down and down and down. With us move millions of others, our companions in awakening from fear. At the bottom, we discover water, the healing water of compassion. Right down there in the thick of things, we discover the love that will not die." Isn't that amazing? As the quote explains, compassion is not the bypassing or avoidance of struggle, but it's also not codependence. It's not over-identifying with someone else's situation or getting lost in them. Wise compassion does have boundaries, and we need to bring our mindfulness to this too. Sometimes an act could seem really altruistic or helpful, but actually could create harm or hold someone back from growing in the way that they actually need to grow. Like, simple example, imagine a mother watching her child struggle with their math homework. And they're both really stressed out. It's getting late. The kid is not getting into the long division. And the mom is like, what are we going to do? She could do the homework for them. And maybe they would both feel relieved that night. This is done, checked off the list. But ultimately, that's not the compassionate move for the child, to learn and to feel empowered and grow, or to even access the educational help that they might need. Pema Chodron's teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche, had a term called idiot compassion to describe this kind of well-intentioned misfire in the realm of compassionate action. And he definitely liked to use provocative words like idiot compassion to get his students' attention. But it's memorable, right? Idiot compassion, a misfire. And that could be where we're either enabling someone or holding them back or harming ourselves in our desire to be compassionate. One thing I think about when I'm walking this line is the difference between generosity and sacrifice. If I'm being generous, I'm giving something that I actually have to give. If I'm sacrificing, I'm giving beyond that, or giving in a way that perhaps depletes me. And sometimes we do choose to sacrifice, but we can't sustain that all the time. More often, the compassion needs to come from that place of an overflowing cup where our needs are met too. And remembering that the wholeness of the situation includes you. So the compassionate response must factor you in, or else the care is not whole. It's missing something. The awareness is missing something. So this brings us back to the image of the bird and the way that the wisdom and the clarity are there to balance that compassionate impulse. And there are other forms of idiot compassion that could be harmful for the intended recipient of the compassion. But this is kind of the example of when our compassion doesn't include ourselves, when we overgive. That's part of what leads to the term compassion fatigue, which, when we're leaving ourselves out of the compassion equation, this can happen. And compassion fatigue can also be more complex and related to things like a sense of futility, or being up against a system or a problem that's too big, or feeling really isolated within something like that for too long of a time period. So it can be quite a tangle. But compassion ultimately is a really rich practice that can be a challenge to embody in the world. And we need to watch for the different ways that it could get out of balance. Meditation and our movement practices are the training ground for opening to this energy of compassion, but at the same time honing our clarity and awareness. And like with Metta, we can practice with compassion phrases, sending compassion to ourselves and out to others. So for some example compassion phrases, these are ones that I use sometimes. And when you hear the pronoun, the I, it could be may you, it could be may all beings. You can shift that as you are targeting your compassion energy to others. So here are the phrases. May I be held in compassion. May my distress be eased. Where there's struggle, may there also be caring. May I be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. So it's a little bit of a different flavor than the metta. It's more acknowledging that there is struggle, there is distress, and that we are aiming to meet that, hold that in our meditation. So you can use these phrases or phrases like these with yourself as the muse, or with all the same categories as we covered in the metta practice. You can go back and listen to that podcast episode from a few weeks ago. But that would be the benefactor, the dear friend, the neutral person, the difficult person, and all beings. Or you can just go with whoever is on your mind and they're struggling, because you probably have plenty that you can think of. People you know, people on the news, individuals, groups of people, which all can serve to remind us that we're not alone in this human experience, and that it does include a certain amount of inevitable struggle. Compassion. So, okay, that's our introduction to compassion practice. And I'll be sending out the 3-page deeper dive worksheets on compassion during the first week of April. So if this subject resonates with you and you want to keep diving into it more and more and reflecting on it, just be sure you're signed up for the newsletter, and you'll get all the upcoming resources that I have in store for you this month. So the link to that is in the show notes. And of course, there are sign-up forms on my website at movedtomeditate.yoga. And as always, if you're listening to this later and it's not around the end of March and beginning of April of 2022, you might have missed the newsletter, but you can still email me if you'd like the worksheet, and I will be happy to add you for future months and send you the compassion worksheet in the meantime. Okay, that's our episode for today. Thank you very much for listening to this reflection, and I hope there were a few nuggets of interest in here for you. It means a lot to me that you're spending your time here and participating in this podcast community and practicing compassion. So be well until next time. So that's today's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with a friend and/or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and help others find us that way. To learn more about my work, the Moved to Meditate class library, live online classes, teacher trainings, and private lessons, go to movedtomeditate.yoga. Thanks so much for listening.